little holes. He held it was delaminating these layers. It was porous. He held a light behind it and found that the light was streaming through.
We're going to talk about the submarine now. The Titan that dived to the Titanic tragically imploded, killing 5 people. Rest in peace to those 5 people, right? Now, I've actually found evidence, new evidence, which has came out, as far as I'm aware, tonight. An email from David Lockridge, the same whistleblower who used to work for OceanGate as an engineer. If you recall on the previous video, if you haven't watched that previous video yet, check it out. Basically, this one is an email, okay, from David to another worker there, basically saying that he's extremely concerned that Stockton is going to be showing off and he's going to get himself killed and whoever else goes with him, basically for his ego. That goes to show that his close colleague knew he was doing a lot of this for his ego. And we further learn on this video that Stockton Rush actually had the company made in a way so that he could take passengers down in that submarine legally. You're not allowed to do it passenger-wise. You can't take passengers in an experimental submarine, right? Or submersible. How did he do it? Well, he classified it in a way like they were mission specialists, right? And it was out of American territory, right? Therefore, he could basically do what he wanted to do in that regard. Just listen to this person, right, who got very much involved with the investigation at the time and is very knowledgeable. He speaks to a news channel. Check this out.
That sub is an accident waiting to happen. He also added this about then CEO Stockton Rush. He said, "I don't want to be seen as a tattletale, but I'm worried he kills himself and others in a quest to boost his ego." Rush, of course, was among 5 people who died in the tragedy.
Yeah, so basically, David Lockridge sent that email to his colleague, and it unfolds now, as you'll see. We speak to somebody who had a lot of contact with the company and who has a lot of experience out on the sea as well. And he tells a tale how, well, not a tale, he tells a story, a real story, how basically this colleague, this David Lockridge, even after he was fired on the spot for not certifying it for the dive, he then went to the US government to say his concerns in 2018, and there was no further action done from that point. So does that mean the US government are also complicit here? Listen to this.
Sure. Yeah, David Lockridge was perhaps the only highly experienced submarine pilot who worked at OceanGate at the time, and he was hired as their director of marine operations. And as part of that role, as they transitioned from the building phase into the testing phase, he was required to sign off that this was safe to dive. So he was raising concerns on the factory floor for much of the latter half of 2017. And was just constantly being dismissed, at which point he decided he was going to take this serious inspection report and he was going to detail everything in writing and submit it in writing to Stockton Rush, the CEO, and Tony Nissen, the director of engineering. And in this, over the next sort of day it was January 18th, 2018, so more than 5 years ago, Lockridge inspected every major component of the sub.
Yeah, so just wanted to pause the video there. He's now about to list all the reasons that David Lockridge had found, right, that was wrong with the submarine and the reason that he would not sign off on this particular dive, right? This is absolutely shocking. When you hear what he found, the state of the submarine was in, right, you'll be shocked. Listen to this.
And found that glue was coming away from the seams of the ballast bags. You had mounting bolts threatening to rupture things, ceiling faces that had errant plunge holes, O-ring grooves that deviated from standard parameters, everything that could go wrong was sort of going wrong. There were snagging hazards, there were important components attached with zip ties, flammable flooring, and the interior vinyl wrapping would emit highly toxic gases upon ignition.
How could you go down that deep with other people's lives at risk? How could you do that when your submarine had glue coming away, flammable materials used, toxic gases from certain other materials that if they were ignited? The thing was a death trap, right? Like, for me, Stockton Rush is nothing short of being a murderer. Like, that's just my opinion. You may disagree with that, right? Now he comes to the main point, the carbon fibre, the state and condition of the carbon fibre. Watch this part, the most important part. Watch this part.
But the number one concern for Lockridge was that the actual core of this submarine, the pressure boundary, which is what keeps people alive at 3,800 meters, where Titanic is, where the external water pressure is about 6,000 pounds per square inch, is made of carbon fiber, which is not used in deep ocean submersibles because under compression, it's a capricious material. It's not made to be used under compression. It's fibers. It's like rope. It's strong under tension, but not under compression. So he examined that a section of it and found that it was filled with little holes. He held it was delaminating these layers. It was porous. He held a light behind it and found that the light was streaming through, and he refused to sign off on the dive.
Wow. Shocking, isn't it? So anybody now that believes that Stockton Rush was just, it was an accident, right? It was careless. It was far more than careless. He knew full well the dangers involved. He had an engineering degree. He was a very intelligent man, for what it was worth. He knew the risk. He knew what was going on with the submarine. So what did he do? Did he listen to his engineer? What did he do next?
And Stockton Rush said that because you refused to sign off on this manned testing, you cannot do your job as Director of Marine Operations, and so he fired him on the spot.
He seems to take personal offense to criticism, right? Because Lockridge knows people outside of OceanGate, and there's a co-head of a company that actually has a classed titanium sub.
So it turns out that actually Stockton Rush, the CEO of OceanGate, actually was quite jealous and quite annoyed that it appears the owner, like the main man of another company who has a titanium sub, which actually, as you'll hear now, can go to far, far greater depths than the Titan. In fact, the Titanic's dive wasn't even a proper dive for this other company's submarine, right? And you'll hear why. So the owner of that contacted Rush and basically warned him. And Rush took it as a dig, as a, kind of look, like, you're not going to be able to do it due to safety things. And it was all about stopping him doing what he wanted to do at the end of the day. So yeah, listen to this.
Of course, this sub, the submersible that imploded, it was not classed. And this co-head of this company says to him, basically warning him, and he lashes out, Stockton Rush does, saying that he's tired of industry players who try to use a safety argument to stop innovation. He seemed so confident that he was doing something new and different, and that he was being stymied by people saying it was in the name of safety. But he seemed convinced it wasn't, even though truly, clearly it was.
Very sad, isn't it? So, what do you guys think? What do you think about it now? What do you think about Rushton? Stockton Rush, rather. What do you think about it? For me, personally, he knew full well what was going on, and he was incredibly stubborn and basically wanted his own way. Probably always had his own way in his life, more or less. Did what he wanted to do. Dismissed or sacked anybody who went against him. Clearly, he sacked David Lockridge. And he wasn't the only one that was sacked, I believe. But it gets better. It gets better. Now we hear about how he basically went through many, many loopholes with his company to try and make it so that he could take people down there as mission specialists rather than passengers, right? But they weren't mission specialists, were they? The 19-year-old was not a mission specialist. He was just a scared teenager kid on his first dive with his dad, you know. And it was supposed to be his mum going, but because the son was old enough at that point, they let him go instead. Now, Stockton made it so that he could do it, kind of do it, not being against the law. Listen to how he did this. It's shocking, man. It's really, really shocking.
Yeah, at the end of the day, this tragedy comes down to hubris. It was a matter of this kind of, Silicon Valley disruptor attitude, but it wasn't about beating the other companies. It was about trying to beat physics. And you're not going to win that. And they didn't win that. And it was sort of blindingly obvious for years that this sub was not being constructed in a manner that would work under great pressure. You can build a sub that's experimental, but you can't take passengers in it. That's completely illegal. And so they structured the company such that it was falling outside of US jurisdiction in various ways. They had all kinds of sort of steps taken so that they weren't actually passengers. They were categorized as mission specialists. But how can you have a 19-year-old kid who's terrified of going inside, who specialists? It's completely incoherent, and I imagine that this will continue for a long time in courts, because you can only call something an accident if it's truly an accident. And if there's 5 years of very explicit warnings from engineers explaining this is how it will implode, and you refuse to take them seriously, there has to come a point where someone takes responsibility for that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It was no accident. Stockton Rush murdered those 5 people. Manslaughter. He committed manslaughter. And in my opinion, it would be more than negligent manslaughter. He was more than negligent. Negligent might be where you overlook something accidentally, or you are lazy with getting something inspected once, and due to that, somebody dies, right? Stockton Rush designed the whole thing against any rules. He admits that freely on camera. Oh, I broke loads of rules, blah, 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 right? And then from day one, people warned him. Top experts, engineering people, loads of people, right? Even his own workforce warned him. That's more than negligent. He knew full well there was a high risk of it happening. He knew full well that the people he was putting in there was a high chance it was going to kill them, and it was his fault. So to me, that makes him a murderer, right? And that may not be very nice for anybody who knows him and is close to him and, is mourning his death. And I do sympathise with that. It's not your fault. But at the same time, I'm just pointing out that I believe he is wholly responsible for their deaths and should somehow be held accountable. The company definitely should be held accountable. They should not be allowed to manufacture water submersible things anymore, right? Vessels, that's the word I was looking for. And anybody who's still alive from the company, like the director of engineering, right? Forget his name. Tony, was it? Could be wrong. He should be held accountable. He should be in court as well, because he could have stopped it or walked away. And I believe that everybody who carried on working there, in effect, supported his decisions, because anybody who believed wholeheartedly that it was going to happen really should have walked away. Maybe a few of them stayed there, hoping they could kind of be there to limit the damage, be there to try and do the best they could to limit it from happening. But at the end of the day, if a man is not going to listen to you, and he's an egotistical kind of man who's in charge of the company, at the end of the day, the carbon fibre and the glue, in my opinion, is where the failure happened. Probably where the carbon fibre tube was glued to the titanium dome end caps, right? There's no way anybody working there could have changed his mind on that part of it, right? So in my opinion, again, I keep saying that, but in my opinion, they should have just left the company, reported it to the necessary people, and then at least they've cleared their own name, right? I believe that those people are now partially responsible for those 5 people. And let's not forget, You know, that's 5 real people who now, sadly, are no longer with us.
3,800 meters is not actually, it is an extreme depth, let's be clear, but it's not unprecedented. Nothing he was doing was breaking boundaries. The boundary breaking part of this operation was to try to do it in a sub that was unclassed and was clearly designed to do what it did, which was to fail. Class submarines have been going to the Titanic since the 80s. One of the guys in my article had been leading tours to the Titanic in the mid-2000s using Soviet submarines that were built in the 80s. Others in the article, because I happened to be at sea with them some years ago for a much more sort of serious venture where they were sending a manned submersible that was classed to the deepest point in each ocean. The deepest point in the Pacific Ocean is 11,000 meters. It's triple the depth of Titanic. And for that sub, they took the guy from the classification agency to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. He signed that it was unlimited depth at 11,000 meters down. And for that sub, in a titanium spherical hull, which evenly distributes the pressure, not a cylinder which will get crushed under pressure, that titanium sphere hull, the Titanic didn't even count as a dive for classification and insurance reasons. Every 100 dives you have to do inspections, but the threshold for them was 4,000 meters. And if it's above 4,000, Titanic's 3,800, it's not even a dive. So the notion that Stockton Rush was doing something innovative is a complete lie. And basically he had to change the narrative around the point that it became clear that they would never get it classed because it was going to be a failure. And the way that they did that was to sort of lie to their mission specialists, again, their passengers who they've misclassified on purpose for legal reasons, that this, they stopped trying to say that it was safe. They started telling them explicitly, oh yeah, it's incredibly dangerous. You might die. You have to sign a waiver. This is an experimental sub, which was true. But the lie there was that this is how serious exploration is done. It's not how it's done at all. And a last thing that I just need to make very clear is that Dave Lockridge actually did raise this with the US government. After he was fired, he was so concerned about what was going on that he shared his report with OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And that report was then passed on from OSHA to the US Coast Guard. And there's no evidence of any follow-up from there. That was in March of 2018.